The galaxy had forgotten Earth. It was a myth, a cautionary tale for the younger races that spoke of a once vibrant world, now reduced to nothing but smoldering ruins. The Concord had wiped it out 70 years ago, a swift, merciless strike meant to send a message. Never underestimate the power of an established empire. Earth was erased from the star charts. Its people thought extinct, its name reduced to an obscure footnote in the galactic history books. Yet, for all the galaxy's confidence, there was still a whisper, a signal. It had started small, just an anomaly at the edges of known space, something too faint to be of concern. Deep within the Sarkonine system, the signal first caught the attention of Drak, a disillusioned xenocartographer working for the Galactic Survey. His days were spent cataloging distant worlds, unremarkable and forgotten. But when his scanners picked up the anomaly, it was different. Not the static hum of background radiation, not the scattered noise of rogue comets or damaged satellites. This signal had a clear pattern, like a code buried under layers of interference, deliberately sent into the void. The first time he intercepted it, he assumed it was a glitch. The second time, he thought it might be a distress call from an unknown ship, its coordinates lost in the immense, uncharted space. But then it repeated. Again and again. Drak's curiosity grew. The signal wasn't just a static burst. It was deliberate, and it was growing stronger. Days passed as he tinkered with his equipment, refining his scans, trying to pinpoint the source of the mysterious transmission. The signal was unmistakably human in origin. It was too advanced, too precise to be a random occurrence from some forgotten shipwreck. Drak had heard the rumors, the tales of Earth's destruction, of how the Concord had annihilated it in a wave of unrelenting force. But what if they were wrong? What if Earth wasn't gone after all? The signals began to form words, a language he recognized, human standard distress protocols. Drak's fingers trembled as he adjusted the frequency to lock onto the message. The transmission, when finally decoded, sent a chill down his spine. It wasn't a call for help. It was an invitation. We are awake. We remember. He stared at the screen in disbelief. The signal continued, repeating the same phrase over and over, now unmistakably clear. Earth wasn't just a dead world. Earth had been hiding, waiting, surviving. And now, it was coming back. Suddenly, his ship's alarms blared, breaking his focus. Drak's pulse quickened as he looked out his viewport. The empty void outside seemed to throb with an unnatural tension. His heart pounded as a black shadow moved across his instruments, growing larger. A vessel, sleek, alien, yet undeniably human in design, appeared out of nowhere. It seemed to pulse, almost alive, like a predator tracking its prey. Before Drak could react, the strange ship opened fire, silent beams of energy cutting through the darkness, and his ship erupted into flames. The last thing Drak saw, just before his systems failed, was the message flashing on his screen again. We remember everything. Then, nothing. The signal, it seemed, had already begun its journey. The universe was a vast and indifferent place, but in the wake of Drak's death, a ripple began to spread, unnoticed at first. By the time the Galactic Concord took notice, it was already too late. Trade convoys that once cruised freely through the great expanses of deep space were now simply gone. No distress calls, no debris, no trace. A missing cargo ship, Tremor's Bounty, vanished along the Viridian route, a well-traveled corridor near the heart of Concord-controlled space. The freighter had been carrying valuable resources from Hindra 5 to the capital, Varellus. It was expected to arrive within the standard 4-day window. When the ship didn't, an initial investigation turned up nothing. No alarms, no indicators of mechanical failure, no ghost signals. It simply ceased to exist. A week later, another vessel disappeared. Then a third. Then a dozen. Reports flooded in from all corners of the Empire. Vessels going dark without warning. The Concord's best surveillance grids saw nothing. The ships, with their precious cargoes of resources and trade goods, were just swallowed by the void. No sign of battle. No sign of pirates. No sign of anything at all. Concord Command launched an emergency operation. A strike team, led by Admiral Thera Essol, a seasoned war veteran, was dispatched to investigate. Her fleet was vast and well-equipped, the pride of the Concord military. They were prepared for anything, except what they would encounter. Days into their search, their sensors pinged something. A ship. A dead ship. Not one of theirs, but an ancient Terran design, barely recognizable amidst the scars of time and fire. The Juno's Wake, a ship lost in the early stages of the Purge, had somehow reappeared. Its hull was punctured in several places, dark streaks of burn marks covering the surface. But it wasn't the damage that was alarming. It was the eerie silence surrounding the wreckage. There were no distress signals, no log entries, no human survivors. Admiral Essol's ships moved cautiously toward the wreckage. They found no crew, no remains, just the hollowed shell of the vessel, adrift in the vacuum. She ordered a boarding party to investigate further. What they found was worse than anything she could have imagined. The interior was a labyrinth of scorched walls, broken consoles, and shattered windows. The crew quarters had been turned into something unrecognizable. The bodies of the former crew, if they could still be called that, had been mutilated beyond belief. Alien symbols were carved into their flesh, symbols that seemed to shift and change the closer the human eyes came. The most chilling discovery came in the cockpit. The navigation logs were completely wiped, but the final entry was displayed clearly on the monitor. We remember. The crew's mutilation wasn't random. It was deliberate. The attack was surgical. The damage was coordinated. Admiral Essol's voice echoed through her comlink as she ordered the wreckage to be retrieved, but her words felt hollow. The implications were terrifying. Earth hadn't been wiped out. Earth had been waiting. But waiting for what? For whom? The following day, a transmission was intercepted. It wasn't much, just a few lines of static. But the message that broke through was unmistakable. The harvest begins. Time to reap what you have sown. And just like that, the Concord realized the truth. Whatever was hunting them wasn't an alien species. It was humanity. The ripple had become a storm. The panic that spread through the Concord was palpable. Trade lanes shut down, ships were rerouted, and military patrols became more frequent. The once thriving corridors of space began to empty as the alien races who had once traded freely with the Concord pulled back, wary of the mysterious threat lurking in the void. The Sarkanine system, a small mining colony that had long been a footnote in galactic records, suddenly found itself in the crosshairs of the Concord military. Admiral Thera Essol, still reeling from the discovery of Juno's Wake, had ordered an inquiry into the growing number of disappearances. No ship had yet returned intact, and even those who survived reported an unsettling truth. The attacks weren't like anything the Concord had ever faced. There were no battles, no firefights, no chases. The vessels just vanished, as if plucked from existence by an unseen hand. The only lead, the only hint, was Sarkanine. The colony had been one of Earth's last settlements before the Purge, a collection of humanity's survivors who had fled to the farthest reaches of known space in an attempt to rebuild, unknown to the Concord at the time. They were thought to be extinct, but there were whispers that some of them might have survived, hiding in plain sight, waiting for their moment to strike. Thyra's fleet arrived at Sarkanine under the cover of night. The planet, its surface marred by mining operations and abandoned outposts, seemed eerily quiet. The once bustling colony was now a ghost town. The faint, flickering lights of long-dead machines cast strange shadows across the barren landscape. As Thera's boots hit the dusty ground, a sense of dread washed over her. She had been through countless battlefields, survived pirate raids, and witnessed the brutality of galactic war, but nothing had ever felt as ominous as this. Her team moved swiftly through the dilapidated streets, scanning for any sign of life. It wasn't just that the colony had fallen silent. It was as though it had never been alive to begin with. That's when they found the first clue. In a remote research station on the outskirts of the colony, Thera's team stumbled upon a set of human-made tech, but it wasn't from the time of the Purge. The devices were too advanced, too intricate. Some were barely functional, others completely dead, but each piece had one thing in common. They all carried faint traces of Earth's signature. These were human devices, repurposed, reprogrammed, or repaired, but still unmistakably Terran in origin. Then, in a nearby lab, something far worse was uncovered. A group of bodies, human but not quite. Their features were mangled, but there was something familiar in their faces, something undeniably human. These were no ordinary survivors. They had been experimented on, re-engineered. Some of them still clung to life, their forms shifting and twitching unnaturally, as if their bodies had been stretched to their breaking point. At the heart of the lab, a series of data logs were discovered, filled with terrifying reports. The survivors of Earth had begun something new, something the galaxy was not prepared for. One phrase repeated over and over in the encrypted data: the continuance. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a ship. It was a plan. The human survivors had not been waiting in the shadows for revenge. They had been rebuilding themselves, piece by piece. They had taken the very best of alien technology, hybridizing it with their own. They had learned how to manipulate the fabric of the galaxy itself. They had become something new. The realization hit Thera like a cold wave. Humanity hadn't simply been biding its time. They had been evolving. And now, they were ready to strike. The discovery at Sarka 9 sent shockwaves through the Concord Military Command. The dead bodies, the repurposed human technology, and the cryptic mention of the continuance all pointed to a terrifying reality. Earth's survivors were no longer the weak, scattered remnants the galaxy had once dismissed. They were organized. They were evolving. And they were ready for war. Admiral Thera Essol sat in her command center, staring at the reports from her team. The implications were clear. The humans weren't simply hiding. They had been learning, adapting, and building a force that could challenge even the most powerful empires in the galaxy. But what made her blood run cold wasn't just the technology they had at their disposal, or the bodies they had altered. It was the chilling efficiency with which they operated. The Concord wasn't facing a conventional enemy. They were facing an intelligence far more patient and calculating than anything they had ever known. That became apparent when 3 days after the discovery at Sarka 9, Concord's primary communications relay was hacked. It wasn't a brute force attack. It wasn't an assault. It was subtle, surgical, a whisper through the complex layers of Concord's advanced security systems. The data that slipped through was so carefully crafted, it took the Concord weeks to even notice. When they did, it was too late. A key fleet admiral, Jonar Tyron, found himself face to face with the unthinkable. His command was compromised, not by any conventional means, but by a human agent who had infiltrated his inner circle. For weeks, Tyron had suspected a leak, but he had trusted his officers. That trust, however, had been misplaced. The agent wasn't a soldier. She wasn't even a spy. She was something much worse. She was a shadow. The human, codenamed Vera, had been embedded in his staff for months. She had been feeding them false intelligence, altering reports, steering military operations away from key targets, making them waste resources. By the time Tyron uncovered her, the damage had already been done. Vera's capture was swift, but it didn't matter. She never spoke. She didn't need to. She had already planted the seed of doubt in Tyron's mind. If the humans could infiltrate his ranks so thoroughly, what else had they done? What other systems, operations, or fleets had they compromised without anyone knowing? The realization hit him with a chilling clarity. Earth's survivors weren't just fighting for revenge. They were fighting for control. Control of the galaxy's pulse, control of the power structures that had once ruled them. And they had been doing so from the shadows, slowly and meticulously, like a virus spreading through the heart of the Concorde. Admiral Assaul's hands trembled as she read the intercepted message from the human agent, sent just hours before her capture. It was simple, elegant in its cold finality. The harvest has begun. We have been watching. You have no idea what we've become. As the words flashed across her screen, she knew there was no going back. The war had already started, and humanity's influence had spread far beyond what anyone could have predicted. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. Humanity had become something else entirely, a force that operated without mercy, without hesitation. They were playing a game the Concorde couldn't even comprehend, and the rules had already shifted in humanity's favor. And there was nothing the Concorde could do to stop it. For weeks, the Concorde struggled to make sense of the chaos that was unraveling at the heart of their empire. Their intelligence was compromised. Their military was fractured. Their trade routes were slowly being choked off, one by one, and their most powerful fleets were left impotent, unable to respond effectively to an enemy they couldn't see or understand. What had begun as the disappearance of isolated ships had now evolved into something far more sinister. A slow, methodical dismantling of the Concorde's very foundation. It wasn't just humanity's retaliation they were facing, it was their resurrection. On the surface, life within Concorde space appeared unchanged. The markets continued to operate, the ships continued to trade, and the galactic bureaucrats continued their endless meetings. But behind closed doors, the leadership was in panic. Ships that should have arrived days ago had gone silent. Entire sectors of the galaxy's infrastructure had simply ceased functioning, as if an invisible hand had silently severed the connective tissue that held the Empire together. But it wasn't an outside force that had done this. It was humanity. Admiral Thera Assaul sat in her war room, staring at the holographic map of the galaxy. The last few weeks had been a blur of missteps, failed operations, and cryptic reports. Every fleet dispatched had either been sabotaged or redirected, and every response had only deepened the uncertainty. The attacks weren't overt. They didn't involve massive battles or open warfare. They were a series of small, targeted disruptions. Systems were tampered with. Supply chains were cut off. Key infrastructure was damaged, all without warning, all without mercy. The first true blow came when a fleet of Concorde warships, sent to quell a suspected human uprising on the mining moon Terran 4, was ambushed. The fleet arrived expecting a simple military operation. What they didn't expect was to find themselves drawn into a labyrinth of abandoned tunnels beneath the surface. The ambush was swift and deadly, taking out half of the fleet's forces before they even realized what was happening. Human guerrilla fighters, highly trained, and using advanced tech adapted from the very alien races the Concorde had once crushed, struck with ruthless precision. They didn't fight to win. They'd fought to disrupt, to destabilize, to sow doubt, and they succeeded. For the first time in Concorde history, an entire fleet, including their flagship, was rendered useless, left to float in the orbit of a dead moon. The human forces didn't claim victory in the traditional sense. There were no banners raised, no speeches given. The attack was quiet, surgical, and efficient. Back on Concorde's capital world of Pharelis, the Council convened in desperation. The attacks were not simply localized strikes. They were part of a larger, more coordinated effort. A larger web of influence had been set in motion, and the deeper they dug, the more they realized that every facet of their empire had been infiltrated. Their military databases were leaking. Their communication systems had been altered. Their alliances had been manipulated. There was no safe haven anymore. Every corner of Concorde space had been touched, every path twisted. But what unnerved them most was the realization that these strikes weren't random. They were calculated. They were part of a plan, one that the humans had been slowly laying in place for decades. They hadn't just survived the purge. They had been quietly rebuilding, waiting for the right moment to act. And now, that moment had come. The message from Earth's survivors, once cryptic, now seemed almost prophetic. Humanity had been watching. They had been preparing. And the Concord was no longer their conqueror. It was their prey. The first true confrontation came not in the battlefield, but in the quiet corridors of power. As the Concord reeled from its mounting losses, a secret meeting was held in the deepest chambers of the Varellus command complex. It was an emergency session, one that had been called without the usual ceremony or fanfare. The council knew it had crossed into dangerous territory. The enemy was no longer a ghost in the machine. The enemy had a face now. Admiral Thera Asol stood before the council, her expression stone cold. She had seen the horrors on Sarka-9, heard the whispers of the continuance, and witnessed firsthand the reach of humanity's newfound power. What was once dismissed as a faint anomaly had blossomed into a full-scale insurgency. But it wasn't just an insurgency. It was a coordinated effort to dismantle the very infrastructure that upheld the Concord. What we're facing is more than just a fight for survival, Thera said, her voice sharp. Humanity has learned how to weaken us, how to choke our resources, how to tear apart our command structure from within. We underestimated them. A murmur spread across the council chamber, but it was clear that no one truly understood the scale of what she was saying. The sheer audacity of what Earth had done was beyond them. They had always viewed humanity as an afterthought, something to be wiped away with one final stroke of Concord's might. But now, they were facing the consequences of that arrogance. The council's representative, a sleek, sharp-faced ex-Vuor named Seltra, leaned forward. You speak as if we're already defeated, Admiral. We have fleets. We have technology. We can wipe them out. You're wrong, Thera interrupted. They have already won. Her words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. What we're seeing isn't just a military assault. They're slowly suffocating us, one nerve at a time. The attacks, the sabotage, the mind games, it's all part of something much bigger. It's about control. They've learned how to manipulate every aspect of our empire, to make us fight with each other instead of against them. Seltra's eyes narrowed. Then what do you suggest we do? Allow them to continue picking us apart? Thera's gaze hardened. No. But we need to change how we think about this. We cannot fight them with brute force. The Concord has always believed in overwhelming power, but humanity doesn't fight like that anymore. They fight like ghosts. They've adapted. They've become part of this galaxy, and now they know it better than we do. A heavy silence fell over the room as the implications of Thera's words sank in. The Concord was no longer the dominant force it had once been. The balance of power was shifting, and the council could no longer ignore the reality of their situation. A low buzz interrupted the silence. A communication had been received. Thera's personal comm link lit up, displaying an encrypted message. She opened it with a cautious hand, her eyes scanning the words that appeared. The last phase begins. Prepare to witness our reclamation. The message was short, but its weight was undeniable. Humanity had already set its final plan in motion. Thera felt a cold, unnerving certainty creep over her. The war was no longer just about survival for the Concord. It was about extinction. The people of Earth, who had once been their slaves, had now evolved into something more. Something that could unmake the empire they had spent centuries building. Humanity wasn't just returning to the galaxy. They were reclaiming it, piece by piece, from the inside out. The war had taken an unexpected turn. Where once humanity's survival was a question, now it was an undeniable certainty. The Concord, whose fleets once spanned entire sectors of the galaxy, was no longer the unchallenged power it had been. The people of Earth, thought to be extinct for nearly a century, had become something entirely different, a force that operated in the shadows, silent yet devastating. And the most chilling aspect of this new humanity was their patience. For months, they had been pulling the strings from the periphery, subtly guiding the galaxy into chaos. Now, it seemed they were ready to make their move, their final phase, beginning with a series of simultaneous strikes against Concord's most vital systems. Admiral Thera Asol knew the end was near. The message she had received was clear. Humanity was reclaiming what had once been theirs, piece by piece, from the inside out. What terrified her more than the apparent inevitability of this takeover was how few realized the scale of the devastation Earth had prepared. The strikes were not just military. They were surgical, targeting the Concord's very heart. The Concord's vast trade networks, which once flowed seamlessly across the galaxy, had ground to a halt. Entire fleets of merchant ships had been sabotaged, their cargoes looted, their crews mysteriously vanishing. But this was only the beginning. The true blow came when the deep space relay systems, the very backbone of Concord communication, were breached. Every fleet, every command ship, every satellite was suddenly cut off from one another, isolated in the darkness of space. Admiral Asol sat in the command center, her mind racing. Her fleet was still intact, but it was scattered and blind. She had no way of knowing how widespread the attack had become. One by one, reports flooded in, fleet commanders panicked, unable to make contact with their superiors. Entire sectors of the galaxy were falling into disarray. And then, the worst of all, the Varellus command center itself had been infiltrated. The heart of the Concord's empire, the very place where its most critical decisions were made, was now under siege. The human forces had infiltrated the city's underbelly, using advanced technology that had been hidden away for decades, as well as the years of meticulous planning that had gone into their reclamation. Thera knew what had to be done. If the Varellus complex fell, there would be nothing left. The entire infrastructure of the Concord would collapse, and there would be no hope of recovering. The time for diplomacy, the time for negotiation, was long gone. This was a fight to the bitter end. She activated the emergency override on her personal comlink, sending a call for reinforcements. Her message was stark and simple. Prepare for full evacuation. Protect the capital at all costs. Do not let Earth's survivors take Varellus. But even as she spoke those words, a terrible, awful realization began to sink in. The survivors of Earth didn't want just Varellus. They wanted everything. The humans had been biding their time, taking advantage of every weakness in the Concord systems. And now, as they closed in on the heart of the Empire, they would not stop until their reclamation was complete. Thyra's hands tightened into fists. The price of this war had been steep, and it was about to get steeper. The Concord had underestimated humanity. Now they were about to pay the price for that mistake. The final hour had arrived. The heart of the Concord Empire, the capital city of Varellus, was in chaos. Sirens wailed in the streets, a piercing reminder that their once invincible grip on the galaxy was slipping. In the vast towers of the Varellus command complex, alarms flashed across the walls, a grim chorus of impending doom. Soldiers scrambled, communications scrambled, and officials who had once commanded fleets now ran for their lives. Admiral Thera Asol stood in front of the massive windows of her command room, gazing out at the sprawling city below. She could see the fires burning, hear the distant thrum of chaos echoing through the complex. Her pulse quickened. The once proud city of Varellus, now a symbol of the Concord's power, was crumbling. She had sent word to the remaining forces under her command, the last pockets of resistance in the city, to make their stand. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about surviving, about giving the last remnants of the Concord a fighting chance, even if only for a moment. The door behind her opened, and a voice echoed through the room. "Admiral, they've breached the outer perimeter. It won't be long now." Thera turned to face the officer, his face a mask of exhaustion and dread. But it wasn't fear she saw in his eyes. It was resignation. The same resignation she had seen in so many of her officers in the last days. The battle was lost. The Empire was lost. "Then we fight until the end," Thera said, her voice cold, resolved. "They're coming for everything we've built. We can't let them take it without a fight." But as she said the words, she knew they were hollow. The fight had already been lost. The human survivors had systematically dismantled everything that made the Concord powerful. The fleets were scattered, the economy was in shambles, and their infrastructure lay in ruins. The people of Earth weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for vengeance. And now, they had it. In the depths of the command complex, the human forces moved like shadows, silent and methodical. They had infiltrated the deepest recesses of Varelis, bypassing security systems with ease, cutting down anyone who stood in their way. These weren't soldiers of a conventional army. These were the remnants of humanity, altered and empowered, the result of decades of experimentation and evolution. They moved with a deadly grace, their actions fluid, synchronized. They didn't need a fleet to conquer. They had become the fleet. Thyra's calm link buzzed, and she answered it with a grim sigh. "Admiral." The voice crackled through the static. It was a familiar voice. Jonar Tyron, the fleet commander who had once been one of the Concord's most trusted leaders. Now, his voice was tinged with the hopelessness of defeat. "It's over. They're in the command center. The last of our ships are gone. Varelis has fallen." Thyra's heart sank, but she didn't flinch. She had known this moment was coming. It had been written in every intercepted message, in every act of sabotage. Humanity had been patient. Humanity had been deliberate. And now, after years of waiting, their vengeance was complete. As the last of the Concord's defenses crumbled, Thyra realized with chilling clarity that this wasn't just the end of a war. This was the end of an era. The Concord had once been the embodiment of dominance, of unrivaled power, but now it lay in ruins. Humanity was no longer a relic of the past. They had reclaimed the galaxy, and there would be no Concord left to fight back. With a final glance at the decimated city below, Thyra whispered to herself, "They've won." And with that, the lights of Varelis flickered and died.